Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a type of video I haven't done in a while, and the type of video I hope to do more of moving forward. Today, what I'm going to do is rank the top 10 pitchers of the decade of the 1970s. So, for me, the 70s were a great time. From 70 to 79, I would have been 9 to, say, 18 years of age. Watched a ton of sports, and there were just some great players that played in that era. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you my list of the top 10 pitchers from 70 to 79. And I'd love for you to take a look at it. Let me know where you agree or disagree. But how about we just flip this camera and jump into my list of the best pitchers of the 70s. Okay, so before we jump into the list, I want to tell you there were a lot of great pitchers who had great seasons in the 70s that did not make this top 10 list. And those pitchers include guys like Jim Cott, Phil Niekro, Jerry Koosman, Louis Tiant, and Tommy John. All of those guys had fantastic run in the 70s, but they didn't make my top 10 list. So coming in at number 10 for me is this guy, Ferguson Jenkins. Fergie, he was a great pitcher in the 60s also, but in the 1970s, he had 178 wins in the decade of the 70s with a 3.38 ERA. He had 184 complete games and 33 shutouts. He was a two-time All-Star. He won the Cy Young one year, and he was a four-time 20-game winner. Plus, he had two sub-3 ERA seasons. So that's Fergie Jenkins coming in at number 10. Coming in at number 9 is this guy, Vida. And when you just, from pure talent, this guy was as good as any pitcher on the list. He had some off-field issues, as we all know, but Vida himself was a fantastic player. In the 70s, he had 155 wins, and he had a 3.07 ERA for the decade. 3.07, pretty good. He was a four-time All-Star. He was a three-time World Series champ, and he won both the Cy Young and the MVP in 1971 when he went 24-8 with a 1.82 ERA. Vida won 20 games 3 times during the decade, and he had a sub-3 ERA 4 times. His ERA was under 3, and one time it was under 2. So coming in at number 9, Vida. Number 8 on my list is this guy. Number 7 and 8 are just like pillars of consistency in my mind, but Bert Blyleven had a great run in the 1970s. Blyleven won 148 games, and his ERA for the decade was 2.88. So he's one of 4 guys that had sub-3 ERAs on this list, and he's coming in at number 8. So in addition to the 148 wins, he had 32 shutouts with 145 complete games. He was a 2-time All-Star, won 20 games once. But check this out. He had 7 seasons where his ERA was under 3. Actually, it was 7 seasons where his ERA was under 2.87. That's how good this guy was in the 70s. So coming in at number 8, a model of consistency and an underrated pitcher, massive curveball, Bert Blyleven. Another underrated guy coming in at number 7 for me is Don Sutton. And I'm a Dodger fan, so I'm a big Sutton fan. I think he is underrated. It also gives me a chance to show off this card I bought from Dylan. So I love that in a Dylan slab, so that makes me happy. But Sutton himself in the 70s, he was never the best pitcher in the league, but he was always in the top 4 or 5 pitchers. He won 166 games in the decade. He had a 3.07 ERA. Had 117 complete games with 39 shutouts. He was a 4-time All-Star. He won 20 games once. He had 5 straight top 5 Cy Young voting appearances. And he had 4 seasons with where his ERA was 287 or less. So Sutton was just, he's underrated, just because he was consistent. It wasn't flashy, but he got the job done. And for me, that's number 7, Don Sutton. Number 6 it's a tough one here, and this is one I'm sure a few people will disagree with me on. But number 6 for me is this guy right here, Nolan Ryan. And, he won 155 games with a pretty bad team. He played for the Angels the majority of that time, and he had a 3.14 ERA. To his credit, too, he pitched in the American League, and you got to remember, any pitcher that pitched in the American League, like a Blyleven or Mr. Ryan here, the DH came into play. I believe it was 73, so they had 5 to 6 years of having to pitch to a little tougher competition than their counterparts in the National League. Ryan led the decade with 2,465 strikeouts. He also had 42 shutouts in that decade, which is second on this list for shutouts for that 10-year period. He had 4 no-hitters, threw 4 no-hitters in the decade, was a 5-time All-Star. He was a 2-time 20-game winner, and he had 4 seasons with a sub-3 ERA. Number 6, Nolan Ryan. Number 5, this one was a tough one. It was really tough for me to decide between this guy and Ryan, but number 5 for me is Jim Catfish Hunter. Catfish had 169 wins in the decade. And, the last 3 years of the 70s, he really ran into some arm trouble, and he probably got like 20, 30 wins, 25 wins over 3 years. But the first 7 years of the decade, he was a monster. He had 169 wins. He had a 3.17 ERA. He pitched 30 shutouts. He won the Cy Young. He was a 6-time All-Star. And he was a 5-time World Series champ. And that's one of the big differentiators for this guy. And I know, he and Vida Blue and Kenny Holtzman were mainstays on those great A's teams that won 3 in a row. And then in free agency, he went over and he was the rock behind those Yankee teams that won some titles. So, it's not by accident that teams won 5 titles with him as their number 1. Because, he did have 4 seasons, by the way, of sub-3 ERA. So, number 5, Jim Catfish Hunter. Getting into the top 4, here is my number 4 person, and that is lefty himself, Steve Carlton. Steve Carlton, he had a great run in the 70s and probably even a stronger run into the 80s. But in the 70s, he won 178 games. Had a 3.18 ERA, 32 shutouts, 165 complete games. He was a 5-time All-Star, and he won 2 Cy Young Awards. 3 times he won 20 games. 3 times he had an ERA under 3, and 1 year he had an ERA under 2. And I believe it was 71. He won 27 games on a team that I think won 60-something, 63 games all year long. So one of the best single-season performances ever in the decade of the 70s. Number 3 might be a surprise to a lot of people. Kind of surprised me. I knew he was good. I just didn't know he was this good in the 70s. And that's this guy right here, Gaylord Perry. Man, was he good in the 70s. Gaylord Perry won 184 games in that decade with a 2.92 ERA. So once again, he's the second person on this list that had a sub-3 ERA for the entire decade. He led the decade in 197 complete games, and he had 36 shutouts. He was a 4-time All-Star. He was a 2-time Cy Young winner and the first guy to win the Cy Young in both leagues, both the American League, which he won first with the Indians, and then the National League, which he won late in the decade with the San Diego Padres. He won 20 games 4 times. And he had 4 seasons of sub-3 ERA and 1 season of sub-2 ERA. He had a massive run in the 70s. He's the number 3 pitcher of the 70s, and that's Gaylord Perry. So now we're down to 1 and 2, and 1 and 2 is such a tough decision. But ultimately, here's who I came up with. The number 2 pitcher of the 70s is this guy right here, Tom Seaver. Tom Seaver, he won 178 games in the 70s, and he had a 2.61 ERA for the decade. He had 147 complete games, and he threw 40 shutouts. He was an 8-time All-Star. He was 2-time Cy Young Award winner. He had 2,304 strikeouts, which was only second to Nolan Ryan in the decade. He won 20 games 4 times, had 8 sub-3 ERA seasons, and 1 sub-2 ERA season. And I would tell you, of the era, right, anybody that was, would you call late 60s to the 80s, this is probably the best pitcher of that era. And I think, his career in the late 60s and then into the 80s is better than our number 1 choice. But if you're just looking at the 1970s, for me, the number 1 choice is this guy right here, Jim Palmer. Jim Palmer had an amazing run in the 70s. He won 186 games during the decade with a 2.58 ERA. 175 complete games, led the decade with 44 shutouts. He had 10 of them in 1 season. In 1975, he had 10 shutouts in 1 season. 8 times he was a 20-game winner. 8 seasons he had an ERA under 3. So that's it was tight between him and Mr. Seaver. And like I said, if I had to tell you if it was the best pitcher of the era, it would be 1-2, in my opinion. But if it's for the 70s, the clear-cut winner on my list is this guy, Jim Palmer. So there you have it. That's my list of the 70s. I would love for you to let me know what you think. If you disagree or agree, that's what this is all about. Let me know your thoughts. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Until we talk again, stay safe, keep collecting. We'll talk to you soon.